They're going to recreate and refashion the workplace. Now that's an organic process that's going to take place over time. But if you are going to recruit the best and brightest in America today, you better be thinking about flexibility. You better be thinking about responding to the workforce concerns. Unfortunately, the federal government is this heavy bureaucracy that just seems immovable when you're talking about 22 million applications to work for the federal government a year. Think about going through that, and how do you then organically build a better workplace that's going to attract the best and brightest workers? And so I think you're going to see this happen without mandates, because as the new generation moves into the workplace, they're going to drive the forces forward that are going to change.
Senator Gillibrand, do you think that there's a role for government to play in either encouraging or mandating more flexible work schedules?
Well, you can't mandate it, but you certainly could encourage it, and you could incentivize it. And so you can give tax benefits. You can. I had a bill, for example, to encourage employers to have on-site daycare, or to at least create a daycare plan so that more workers had access to affordable daycare. I can tell you, if you know where your child is and you could see your child during the day. I remember when I was nursing, because the house had a daycare, it was only a 5-minute drive. I could go over and nurse 3 times a day because my schedule accommodated that. How many workers in America have that flexibility? They just don't. And so we need to incentivize employers to be the best employers and make the business case that this is how you keep the best employees. And I can tell you, the best employers are doing it. So the Googles and the Facebooks of the world that are desperate to keep their female workers, they're figuring out. They're figuring out we need to be able to accommodate young mothers with nursing. We need to be able to accommodate flexible hours. We need to be able to accommodate family needs. And so the marketplace will ultimately dictate. The best companies will have the best policies to retain the best workers. And we as legislators can elevate the issue so they can know these are best practices, and you're not doing them, and you're going to lose some of your best and brightest because of it.
So another question that I think a lot of economists worry about, economists and others, is how do you avoid having more generous leave policies or more generous flexibility plans, whether they're encouraged or mandated, from unintentionally penalizing female workers? So in a lot of other rich countries where they do have very generous family leave policies, or a requirement that employers have to consider a part-time work request, et cetera, there are many more women in the workforce, but they're much more likely to be working part-time. They're much less likely to be in management-type jobs. They're more likely to be in those sort of traditional pink-collar jobs. There's much more gender segregation because it's believed that employers sort on the front end, that women are more likely to take the leave, so employers are less likely to hire them, or at least less likely to hire them into jobs that would be difficult to allow those kinds of arrangements. Do you think about those kinds of trade-offs? How do you make life easier for women, but to the extent that that also makes women more expensive to hire, how do you avoid having them be penalized by employers?
I think is my mic on?
I don't think you're projecting well, but
Is it on?
Well,
yeah.
Yes.
There you go. So,
That's somebody else's fault.
yeah.
This is pretty hot. Maybe I'll just. How about if I just do this? That makes more sense.
Yeah.
If you take a look at kind of where we kind of start out from the standpoint of providing flexibility, because moms want to be moms, and we want to be able to be great daughters, and we want to do the things that we think actually add value to our life beyond a career. And then you go, but won't you be sacrificing your career? The dirty little secret in America is you can't have it all. And I think that one of the things, the speeches that I give, is when people ask me, should I run for office? I want to be a mom. I want to do this. Want to do that. I say you can't have it all. Sometimes there needs to be a prioritization, but that doesn't mean that we should tolerate a workplace that doesn't give you access back to the workplace, as Kirsten calls it, the sticky floor and the glass ceiling. Doesn't mean that we should penalize moms and that we should penalize good daughters. It means that sometimes we're going to have to put our life on pause to do the things that we value or that are important to us in a different fashion. And what I think is going to happen eventually in the workforce is this isn't going to be a gender issue. This is going to be a workforce issue that's going to involve dads and it's going to involve sons, and that it's not just going to be that gender identification with these are your roles and you're going to fulfill these roles. I think we're going to see more entrance into that kind of, you mentioned Mr. Mom. Well, that was a whole story about a man in a role reversal, and I think you're going to see that more and more as our society becomes more and more accepting of gender-neutral roles in America. I don't think we're there yet. I think for my generation, this idea of being the sandwich generation, we're taking care of our kids, putting them through college, and we're also taking care of our moms. I can tell you with a great deal of certainty that the role of taking care of my elderly mother has not fallen on my brothers. It has fallen on me and my sisters, me less so, but that's just where we are right now. Eventually, I think you'll see those gender lines being blurred, but again, it's an organic process. But anyone here who thinks that I'm telling you you can have it all, I think that's unrealistic. You got to prioritize in your life.
So, Senator Gillibrand, another way of asking about the issues that I was trying to raise is, are there ways that we could encourage either men to take more active roles in terms of caregiving, whether it's to children or to other family members, or to encourage employers to be accepting of those roles? Like if you look at survey data, men actually report having more work-life tensions than women do, perhaps in part because employers are more accepting of their female employees taking time off than their male employees.
Well, I think you can start with gender-neutral policies. So if you had paid leave, for example, on a gender-neutral basis, then any worker can take it for any life event, and it becomes more acceptable for men to take leave for caregiving. Now, but you have to recognize, and I think this is part of what Heidi was saying, women are often natural caregivers. We often want to take care of our loved ones. We often want to be able to be there for our elderly mothers or be there for our kids. But you have to be able to sustain their opportunity in the workforce. So that's why leave is so important. Because if someone in your family is in a hospital bed and dying and you want to be by their side, what has to happen is you have to have the flexibility to leave, but then come back and not lose your place in that company and be able to pay your bills during that time. So that's why I think having paid leave as a priority is going to create more opportunity for men and women to reach their full earning potential and not actually have to quit the job. I mean, because I can tell you, one of my former employees who's now running for Congress, Colleen Deacon, she's amazing. But when she was a young woman, she was a waitress, and she earned the minimum wage. She had no sick days and no vacation days. So when she got pregnant, she couldn't accommodate the birth of the child because there were no days you can take off. You need to be at work tomorrow, so she had to quit. She went on Medicaid. She had WIC for food supplements for her baby and for her. And then she had to start over at a new job 3 months later, earning the minimum wage, losing her seniority, losing whatever rung she had walked up. That's the sticky floor. So there's no way for her to keep moving ahead in that company where she's earned some seniority and experience. And so I think if you change that one dynamic, you are going to have far more women earning their full potential, which also will change the discrimination. I mean, we don't have equal pay for equal work. You have to work on that as well. You don't have affordable daycare. Huge impediment for young workers who don't earn enough to pay for daycare. We don't have universal pre-K. That's a whole year you are out of the workforce where you could be. So these are basic, and you don't have a living minimum wage. And so if you can't even earn above the poverty line working 40 hours a week, that's not the picture of the American dream that you and I know. So you need the structural changes so women can compete better and earn their full potential and reach their full potential in the workplace and make it more acceptable for men to take those responsibilities.
So there are some countries, as you may know, that have instituted like a daddy leave quota, to try to incentivize more fathers to take time off at the birth of their child and to also destigmatize it, I guess, amongst their employers. Yeah. The idea being that it's not completely gender neutral, that there is time off that is only available to fathers, and that if the father takes time off, the mother gets more time off. Do you think that would be worth considering here? If that's something you can talk to.
I mean, I think that all of these things are the great experiments that are out there economically, mm-hmm. and the question is do we have a culture that supports gender roles equalizing? And the answer is today we don't.
No.
I mean, I think that's being honest. I don't think men see themselves as people who would take a lot of time off to care for, a newborn baby. That's something that their wives would do. They hope their wives can re-enter into the workforce.
But I do think
at a
that's
level.
changing generationally.
I do, and that's my point. I don't know
20-somethings
that,
have a different view than our
yeah.
age.
I mean, I think you can incentivize these things, but I think at the end of the day, that new generation of male leaders who are much more engaged with their families. I tell a story. When I ran in 2000 for governor, my kids were 10 and 12, or 14. And people would ask me, how old are your kids? And if they asked it that way, I would say, well, they're 10 and 14. Or they would say, how old are your kids? And it was a big bubble. Heidi Heitkamp's a bad mother, right? Abandoning her kids. When they asked me that, I would say, they're the same age as my opponent, John Hoeven's children. and people like physically would recoil from me because they would never have asked him the question with that tone. They would never have assumed that he had an obligation that he was abandoning. He was just going to be the leader of the state because he was gender, identified that way. And so I think it's really important that we lead with good policies, that we lead with good incentives, but that we recognize the cultural impediments that we have. And I want to mention something because this for me is a critical piece of this problem. I want you to think about being a certified nurse assistant. Do you all know what CNAs do?
Yeah.
Right? The hardest work done in America is done by CNAs. They take care of our elderly, and they aren't the ones just administering the shots. They're doing the hygiene. They're doing all of the very difficult physical work. They have the highest category of workers with back injuries. They have a lot of workplace stress. They're dealing with very difficult patients. They're paid among the lowest people in America for some of the hardest work. And so when people say, well, of course, there's going to be disparities because all of these jobs in construction, that's hard work, that's physical labor, your time in construction is limited. I like to say, what about the CNA? And when Janet Yellen was in front of the banking committee, one senator asked her a question about income disparity. And they said, oh, well, we need to retrain and retool the new workforce, and that's going to get us income equality. And when it got to me, I said, who's good? A CNA is pretty highly trained. Why aren't you paying her what she's worth?
Yeah.
Because we don't value that work in America.
Well, so
that's the bottom line.
So the corollary question to that is, if to some extent, and to a large extent, the pay gap is determined in part by the kinds of occupational choices men versus women make.
Right.
Is there a role for policy to incentivize women to go into more lucrative careers, whether change their college major or go into, it doesn't even need to be college educated, but go into other training?
I have to tell you, I just so resist that because it somehow doesn't fix the fundamental baseline problem, which is we don't pay women who work hard enough. We simply say, well, then you should want to become a roofer because if you go on the roof, then you're going to make, that's how I pronounce that word, sorry. If you're shingling, you're going to get $10 more an hour. Well, I want somebody really highly qualified to help take care of my mom.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think I resist this idea, let's get them into STEM education. I think that's like the cop-out, better training, move them into other occupations, because fundamentally, as a woman told me this when I was running for governor, she said, my boyfriend works construction and I work as a CNA in a nursing home. Can you tell me why people who help people who are in the occupations that I have get paid so much less than people who dig ditches?
Well, daycare workers don't even
Sure.
get the minimum wage.
Well, and that's one of the problems for providing daycare.
Yeah. So it's
You have
so I have a complimentary answer to that. So yes, I agree that you can't make women not do professions that they want to do. You want them to do whatever they want to do, but we should pay them more. And caregiving, it goes to unfortunately a broader problem that we don't value women in society, period.
Yeah.
So,
But what are the policy levers we have?
but let's look. So we don't value women in society, period. And that is shown in many ways. It's shown in how women are portrayed in the media. It's shown in we don't have equal pay for equal work. It's shown in women-dominant industries paid less. It's shown that men and women work in the same industry, they're still paid less, even in a woman-dominated industry. So if you say, well, what about nursing? Are men and women paid the same? No, male nurses are paid more. Let's look at teaching. That's clearly a woman-dominated. Are men and women paid the same? No, men are paid more. So the lack of equality even within a profession is a huge problem. So we have to fight these structural problems where we can, and then also make sure women and minorities are eligible for some of the highest paying professions by not leaving them out when it comes to math and science when they're young. And that's a huge issue. You have to actually notice kids in the kindergarten class, in the grade school class, young girls, minorities, and say, you know, you're actually good at math. Let's talk about what you can do if you're a mathematician. And this is another studied issue. If you label a course at Harvard, water infrastructure in at-risk nations, 70% of the class is men. If you label it community creation of healthy and well-being and happy living, 70% female. It's the same course. So you have to attract women where they are, that if you go into math, science, engineering, you can actually help people. You can change the world. You can meet people's needs, because that's often what women want to do. They want to make the world a better place. And so you can actually encourage them by reaching into the grade schools, lower grades, through inspiring them to actually be great in these industries, so then they're eligible for the fastest growing industries with the highest paying jobs.
I want just one point of illustration that someone once gave me. They said, if you have a newborn and they're in the hospital as a girl, you know, people don't think much if you put her in blue and take her home, right? Yeah, it's no big deal. If you put a newborn infant male in pink and take him home, think about just even at that very early stages, how we differentiate value to gender. I mean, no one puts their newborn baby boy in pink, but we think nothing about putting our newborn baby girl in blue. And I think that's true today, even though that illustration was given to me, 20 years ago.
I think we are now opening the floor to questions. Is there a mic floating around? Okay, so just raise your hands and I'll call on you. Any questions? No one?
Come on, don't be shy.
Look at them.
I can keep going.
I'm curious. How many of you believe that in your lifetime we will have closed the pay gap and will have created, the utopia of 9 to 5? At the end of your work life, do you think that those will be the conditions you're working in? That's really interesting.
It probably also depends on how you define closing the pay gap. I mean, to the extent that the pay gap is also accounted for by women taking more time off than men, for example, to raise children and losing earnings that way, is that counted as part of the pay gap, or is that not?
If you have paid leave, they wouldn't be losing money. That's why you need paid leave.
But I mean, in terms of when they return to the work, when they return from paid leave, they're on a lower trajectory.
Okay. So
But why do they have to be at a lower trajectory? I don't get that. They shouldn't have to be. So when I take 3 weeks off from voting in Congress because I just had my second child, I shouldn't be paid less, and I should not have a lower trajectory. It's just a part of being a human being and being part of this planet that we have children.
But a lot of parents take more than...
Yeah.
Whatever it is, if it's 3 months, that's still a legitimate amount of time.
Can I ask the question this way? How many of you thought that 50% of the state legislatures and 50% of Congress were women, we'd see more progress made in pay equity?
Without a doubt.
It's about leadership, isn't it?
so
And it's
totally
about
about
shared
leadership.
example.
So a question related to that I wanted to ask is that if you look at polling on these kinds of issues, on paid leave, for example, it's very popular amongst both Democrats and Republicans, and yet Republican politicians are not so supportive. What do you think accounts for that? What do you think could sway those in the other party, considering that their constituents are supportive?
I don't know. Constituents need to speak up more, and we need to talk about how this affects regular people. But Heidi and I have talked about this. The biggest problem in Washington is not the lack of bipartisanship or the partisan bickering. The biggest problem in Washington is the lack of empathy. And too many members of Congress are so wealthy, in a bubble, have endless caregivers when they need them, and do not appreciate what most working families go through in society. And that is their biggest problem. So they don't see the problem. Oh, I didn't need paid leave. My wife stays home. Or I didn't need paid leave because we have plenty of money. Or what does that look like? I've never been to a day. I mean, honestly, they just don't live the lives that most Americans live. And so we need more women speaking out, demanding action in red states, and really holding these members accountable. And one of the reasons why Heidi and I are talking about paid leave across the country is this should be something that every American citizen has a right to, because the rest of the world already does it. We're the only country that doesn't, us and Papua New Guinea. So we should be better. We should be understanding it's a drag on the economy. Women earn $320,000 less in their lifetime because there's no paid leave in both pay and retirement. Men lose $280,000. So you think about that untapped income that could be invested in our economy. It's just an artificial drag that we should be addressing.
What about, oh, here we have a question right here.
So we know that the Europeans have, I'm just trying to do a comparison with similar countries. They have great paid leave. I don't know about the differences in pay between men, but I do know that women are less likely to be in CEO positions in Europe. But if you could shed any light on the equity issues.
Well, there's a lot of gender bias in Europe, which just goes to the question you asked earlier. And I don't know if this statistic is still true, but the last time I read about it, Germany doesn't have daycare. So they expect that woman to not only take their leave, but stay home for 2 years, if not 3 or 4. So there's a difference in view of what is a woman's role in society, and they don't imagine her as having a career on the same level as men. So there's bias throughout cultures in Europe, despite the fact that they believe in paid leave. And I just think we should allow women and men to make their own choices about what their careers look like and to be able to support their families in those choices. And that's why paid leave is so important.
And question right here.
Yeah. Hi, thanks very much for being here today. So I am a single female with no intention of having children or necessarily getting married. And I noticed that immediately when we talk about equal pay, the conversation immediately shifts to women's role as caregivers, which statistically is more true of women than men who have greater caregiving responsibilities. So I wonder sort of how you bring women who don't have caregiving responsibilities over and beyond those of the average man into the conversation about equal pay, because it sort of feels as though they're being left out a little bit. So what are some of the policy solutions? Is that pay transparency and so on that means that you can speak to sort of the younger generation that may either be making those choices or not making the same choices at all?
Well, caregiving is beyond parenting, just so you know. I mean, I don't know if your parents are still alive, but given Heidi's example, that often falls to daughters, not sons. And it might be something you actually want to do. It's not necessarily something that is forced on you, because the nature that a lot of women have. But equal pay for equal work affects all women, and it affects all women in all industries. I think there was only one industry where women make more than men. I wonder if anybody can guess what it is.
Stock clerks.
I don't think so.
Pharmacy.
No, it's therapy. So your therapist is valued more because she's probably a better listener. But so yeah, that's it. I think single women are vitally important in this conversation, because equal pay for equal work is something that will affect them their whole lives. But we also have, that's one of the reasons why women's conferences also focus a lot on mentorship and sponsorship and trying to allow women to reach their full potential, because of sometimes we are our own #1 self-doubters. And this statistic is relevant. You know, in their first job interview, women will negotiate their first salaries 7% of the time, but men will negotiate their first salaries 57% of the time. So on the first day of their new job, there's pay inequality because women and men look at that first job opportunity differently. But it doesn't mean the women are wrong, and this is a really important point. Women have enormous emotional intelligence, and they will often perceive, if I play hardball on my salary, if I make waves on my first day, I not only will be considered an unhelpful or an employee that is not well liked, I will be seen as a troublemaker or rocking the boat, whereas that male will be perceived exactly the opposite. He's a go-getter, he's a hard charger, we want him. So, and the studies bear that out, that the perception of women asking for more money is often not well received. And so we have a structural bias about how the world looks at women versus men, and in this country specifically that we come back to. And that means changing roles. It means changing how women are portrayed in the media. Again, having more men and women mentor those women so that they know when to ask for the raise, how to ask for the raise, how to get ahead in the company, because they need that extra encouragement and support, because oftentimes we're our own self-doubters. So I think it has to be a society approach to getting equal pay where it needs to be.
I think it's critically important that we not identify this as a woman's issue.
Right.
You know, if you take a look at the quality of secondary and higher education, elementary education, you may never have a child, but you better be concerned about the quality of education in this country. You have to be concerned about the availability of the workforce to the best and brightest. And so, you know, just as we will talk about these from the empathetic standpoint, I like to talk about it from the economic standpoint. And as a single woman who has, you know, who at this point hasn't made that choice, I would tell you, you need to be concerned about this, because the condition of all of us elevates when we improve the condition of all of us, we elevate the condition for the entire society. And that's one of the things we're going through in this election, is trying to figure out, you know, the top-down policy, but the anger is coming from the bottom. And it's coming because these issues aren't getting addressed. The challenges of working families are not getting addressed. The challenges of access to career opportunities are not getting addressed. And as a result, people are angry and they're looking for, you know, a different paradigm. And that's a failure that we've had politically to address real life issues, not just from an empathetic standpoint, but from an economic standpoint.